right, it is time. Hello! Hi folks. So, welcome once again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me and letting me yell stories at you. Today we have been to Spain, we have been to Portugal. Today we are leaving the Iberian Peninsula. Thank you, Matricula. Good to know, that sounds good. We are leaving the Iberian Peninsula and we are going to France. And along with moving geographically, you may notice that there are also a couple of new visual elements here. I got the the chat widget working, and my background music is from the wonderful Elizabeth Lane, who is Lizard Eats Flies on Twitch, and she kindly allowed me to use this as background, so please go check her out. Hopefully that works. That was not what I meant to do. I did not mean to shout out myself there. I meant to shout out Lizard Eats Flies. I'm not sure why that didn't work. Apologies. Anyway, so we are going to France. We are going to Rouen. The picture that you see here is not Rouen, not yet. My shout out command is not working. That's weird. Cacophony! Hello! Hello! So, anyway, this is Le Havre. This is the little port town on the coast of France where we stopped. Oh yes, hi to both Matricula and Spouse. This little port town, Le Havre. A view of it from the ship, and most of the folks on the ship when we stopped here decided to get up at the ass crack of dawn and get on a bus and go from the coast down into Paris, stay for a few hours and come back. My spouse and I were like, that sounds like a lot of time in a vehicle. I don't want to do that. Not up for that. So we decided to take an afternoon trip to medieval Rouen instead. And that ended up being a much better decision. Good plan. So we had the morning free. So we went into Le Havre to see what was what there and go to the cathedral. I hope you didn't think you were getting away without church pictures, because there are always church pictures. So this is Our Lady of Le Havre, and you may notice it looks pretty different from the churches we've been seeing. It's low, it's round, and that's because it was built on unsteady ground. You know, we built the cathedral in a swamp and it sank into the swamp, so we built the cathedral on top of the sunken cathedral, so forth and so on. But yeah, Matricula, it may be low and curvy, but it's still really pretty. And you can see right over the door we've got Our Lady of the Ocean, because nautical church, port town. And to begin, as we mean to go on, this is the first of several pictures of statues of Joan of Arc that we will see today. And this one was in the Notre Dame de la Havre. And I've seen other statues of Joan in other churches, in the Cathedral at Carcassonne, in I feel like somewhere in Paris as well. And I feel like this is very similar to the statues I've seen before. So, Joan with boy's haircut, like so. There's a reason it's called a page boy. So Joan with the boy's haircut, partially in armor, but with a skirt. They want you to remember she's a woman. We want to be clear on that, right? And we'll get to that, more to that later. All right. The chaste praying looking Joan, exactly matricular. So while we're here, before we get to Rouen, I want to do just a little bit of context and backstory. I'm sure most of you know kind of the big sweeping components of Joan's story, but just in case, she was an illiterate peasant girl, grew up in a little town called Domremy, which, if you're like me, you immediately start singing about a deer, a female. It's like that, but not. But this was a little town in northeastern France. And she was known to be good-natured. She was known to be very pious, but not fanatical. And she started having visions as a teenager. She would go out into the fields to pray by herself, maybe into the woods to pray by herself, and she would have visions. Sometimes of Jesus, sometimes of Mary, and sometimes of saints. And they would talk to her. And now the interesting thing here is the saints that she had visions of. We're going to take a quick look at that because that's important. So, unfortunately, this is not one of my pictures, but I didn't know that this statue existed before I was doing the research for this stream. And this is in Joan's hometown. It's a representation of Joan having her visions of her saints. And in the middle, we've got St. Michael, the Archangel. He's the one all tricked out in gold. To his left, with the sword, we've got St. Catherine. And to the right, with the holding the kind of gold ball thing that's hard to make out, and I'm not really sure what it's supposed to be, we've got St. Margaret. Now, obviously, St. Michael is a military dude. He's kitted out in armor. He is often shown like slaying the devil, represented as a dragon, stabbing him. But the interesting thing about the two lady saints bracketing him is that they are masculine coded. The aspects of their stories are coded masculine as well. They take on roles normally reserved for dudes. So, St. Catherine, one of the really remarkable things about her is that she's known for being a scholar. Here's a picture of just the ladies, because it gives you a little bit better idea what they're about. Again, St. Catherine's on the left, St. Margaret's on the right. And Catherine's pictured here with a sword and a wheel, because she was tortured on a wheel. But before that, she was also really well known for making these eloquent arguments that were super close to winning her the popular favor and saving her neck, right? And she took a scholarly tack. She was very well read. She was kind of beating the church authorities at their own game, and therefore was setting herself up as a clerkly or scholarly figure, which was a super male area, right? This wasn't something that the ladies were supposed to be doing. So she's like a female clerk or scholar. And then St. Margaret, who you can see here with a kind of fuzzy looking and perturbed looking dragon. Hey ladies, yes, Matricula. Perturbed looking dragon. She, in her hagiography, in her stories, she comes off like a lady knight. Lady knight for Jesus. She, women, lady saints are often known for kind of passive resistance, or resistance that requires them to turn their violence on themselves, like as when we talked about St. Lucy. But St. Margaret, I mean, she gets tortured. She gets tortured a lot. There's not a lot of way around that. But she also has these really amazing scenes in her hagiography where she beats up a devil who came to try and tempt her, and like seriously wails on him physically. And then she slays a dragon later in her hagiography. So she's got a lady knight thing going on. Again, woman saint in a very male-coded role. Giving, and these examples are super important because they're doing very much the same thing that Joan ends up doing. They are the exact right bearers for a message of, you're the one who's going to save France. You're the one who you need to go to the king. You need to tell him. Blah, blah, blah. And you need to dress as a dude, right? Because Joan always said that her dressing in male-coded clothes was part of what her saints, part of what the voices she heard and the visions she saw told her to do. Part of what God expected of her, part of how she was supposed to carry this out. So it's all intertwined. And these ladies right here are, again, pretty much the perfect messengers if you're going to be a gender non-conforming resistance fighter. Perfect messengers. So, early life, Joan hears these voices. She pays attention because they don't stop. They get more insistent. And she eventually convinces, I believe, her uncle to take her to go see the king, the Dauphin, uncrowned prince. And he thinks she won't shut up about it. We're going to go there. The Dauphin, or they probably won't even let her see him. They're going to send her home. They're going to send her home. They might punish her a little, and she'll get it out of her head, and it'll be fine. Spoiler. It does not happen that way. So before we get into any more Joan, we're going to move locations. So from Le Havre on the coast, we're coming down into Rouen. And I found myself saying there that, there's plenty of modern Rouen. There's plenty of modern city there. But there's also a really well-preserved medieval quarter, right? Just look at this. Look at this. This, for those of you in the southern United States, this is what Gatlinburg aspires to be when it grows up. This is what it wants to become. It wishes it were this cool and quaint and genuine. And I loved it here. I don't think I've said this yet. This was my favorite stop, in large part because Joan of Arc lore. And I should say that I spent a not inconsiderable portion of my childhood reading the children's biographies of Joan of Arc. Yes, Matricula. Gatlinburg shade. I mean, it's fine. It's fine. Gatlinburg is fine. Just this is much better. This is so much better. But yeah, I spent a lot of my childhood reading biographies of Joan of Arc, and so she's been a figure that's been with me for a long time. So coming here and getting to see this was a big deal for me. We'll talk about why it's a big deal in just a minute. So this is just outside the really medieval part of Rouen. And this is the modern church dedicated to Joan of Arc. Because Rouen, so teenage Joan, 17, gets taken by her uncle, taken to the Dauphin, and she actually manages to get in to see him. Because there was this prophecy floating around at the time, right? Folk superstition, folk prophecy, about how France would be freed and saved by a maid, by a young girl. And the prophecy involved Joan's part of the country, so everyone there knew it, and she was drawing on that. That fit into what her voices were telling her. So she comes to court, and she's saying, that girl you've been looking for, that girl that's been rumored, that's me. Hi, I'm here. I'm here to save you. God has sent me to you. And after some tests set up for her, including a really invasive virginity check, because reasons, the Dauphin was convinced. He was convinced, and he gave her what she asked for. And, you hear different interpretations. Some say she was a surprisingly good military strategist for being an untaught girl. Some say that she was a glorified mascot. And they all kind of confirmed that she probably wasn't used to her fullest potential, whatever that might have been. The king was happy to have her as a morale booster and not really think a whole lot more about it, especially after she helped get him crowned and legitimized. And yeah, matriculate, it's a really gross, intense test, and something that came under scrutiny with her at various points in her life, because clearly she wouldn't have had any credibility if she hadn't been a virgin. Right? So, but the Dauphin's convinced. He She goes out on some campaigns. She's involved in some military strategy. And this is in 1429, 1430. But once the Dauphin gets crowned, he stops listening to her. She's pushing to do more. Let's get more of our own back. Let's get Paris back. Let's do this. Let's go. I'm here for you. And he won't listen. Whether he should have or not is a question I can't answer, but he won't listen. And eventually, she gets captured. In 1430, at one of the battles, she gets captured by the Burgundians, who were aligned with the English, who were the French folks' enemies and occupiers. And they take her to Rouen, turn her over to the English, who turn her over to the church. They take her to Rouen, and here's where they try her. Okay, so this town is where she was tried, where she was convicted, and where she was burned. And I had forgotten that. I knew that this town was important in her story, but I didn't remember that this was where it all ended. And so when we came to the church, which, another view, here are some of the windows. You can see the flame motifs in the glass going upwards. When we came to the church, I wasn't really prepared. I wasn't prepared for the feelings. I wasn't prepared to be where she died. Here's the inside of the church. They are truly A+ windows, vitricula. They are amazing, and I did not have nearly enough time here. I could have spent way more time inside and outside this church. It was gorgeous. It was my favorite, really my favorite modern Catholic church that I've ever seen. I mean, just look at those windows. They're amazing. But outside the church, right here, this little piece of ground that used to be Rouen City Commons, this is where she was burned. So she was tried here. She was tried in Rouen. And she was tried by the church. And we have preserved the transcripts of her trial, in which we see that she may not have been able to read, but she was whip smart. She was super smart. They were trying everything to try and get her to confess to something actionable. Because really, her trial shouldn't have happened. They didn't have enough on her, technically, to try her, but they wanted to get her out of the way. The English wanted her off the field because she was a huge morale boost to the French army, right? She ties into this prophecy, and everyone's got that morale boost. So the English want her off the field. So they break ecclesiastical law, they go against procedure, and they try her without really having cause. And so they're trying to trick her into something, into admitting witchcraft, into admitting heresy. We'll get there, Matricula. We'll get there. I promise. They finally got her on heresy, but not for any theological belief. Okay? Because she was good. When they asked her trick questions, she would not be tricked, she would not be conned. They asked her at one point, do you believe you're in God's grace? And either answer is wrong there, because Catholic doctrine says that you can't know if you're in good grace with God. So if she'd said yes, that would have been heresy because, and how do you know that? And if she said no, then she condemns herself. But she said, if I am not in God's grace, I pray that God would put me there. If I am, I pray that he would keep me there. Boom. Nothing actionable. So what they finally fixated on, which her detractors had been doing for a long time, this wasn't new, they finally fixated on was, you dress like a man. Why do you dress like a man? Do you want to be a man? Are you doing unnatural things with women? And she stuck by it. She stuck by it. It would have been very easy to say, I was misled, I won't do it anymore. But she stuck by it, saying, this is what my voices, this is what my spirits told me to, my saints told me to do. This is also, I dress like this for my protection and my modesty. Because you know what? It is much, much harder to get into men's clothes of the time by force than it was to get into women's clothes. And she was among other things, using male-coded clothes as a defense against sexual assault and rape. Which, even under, stringent no cross-dressing standards, protection is a permissible reason to cross-dress under Catholic doctrine. If wearing the wrong clothes will protect you, that's okay. But they didn't care. They fixated on this, and that's where they got her. So they've condemned her. She's sitting in prison. She knows that they're going to burn her. She's scared. I don't blame her. And they bring her a document that essentially says, sign this and promise to wear dresses and we'll make it all go away. You can live. Also, you can take communion again because they've been denying her the Eucharist. And that's a big deal for a Catholic and a big deal for someone as pious as Joan was. They've been denying her spiritual communion. So she says, without being able to read the document, without being able to see what it really says, she says, okay, I'll sign this. Save my life. I mean, I'm out of commission anyway. I'm scared. I'll do this. She signs it. And she didn't, like I said, she didn't know fully what was in the document. She didn't know that she was recanting, not only wearing women's clothes, but saying, oh, my spirit, I lied about my saints, I lied about the voices, I'm an evil witch, and I repudiate that. A couple of days later, there are conflicting stories. Some say that she regretted recanting and said, my spirits came to me and they said, my saints came to me and they said that this was wrong, that I shouldn't have given up my convictions. And there were reports that her women's clothing, which she had been wearing, was taken from her. That it was stolen and hidden, so she had no choice but to put back on men's clothing. And now, one of the things I found out in researching for this stream that I did not know previously is that heresy is not a capital crime in the Catholic Church for the first offense. it may be a capital crime if you relapse. And when they saw Joan in men's clothing, they said, "You've fallen back. You've relapsed. You said you wouldn't do this. You signed this, saying that you would only wear women's clothing." And of course she tried to explain. Of course she said, one, I regret that. And two, these clothes were taken from me. I couldn't, even if I wanted to, exactly matriculate. She was set up. And she was executed for that. For cross-dressing. For dressing in a way that would help keep her from being raped. And we have documented reports of attempted sexual assault, both from her and from some of the English men who were guarding her in prison. Attempts. So this was by no means an idle fear. But they burned her for it. And here was where they burned her. And I needed a moment here in Rouen. I needed a moment. This is another view of the place she was burned. Our guide seemed to think that the place where the cross is was the place that the stake was. Who knows? So second Joan statue. This is right outside the church. And this is the first Joan statue I'd ever seen that didn't involve her, the chaste Joan praying, or like martial Joan leading the way into battle. This is Joan in the flames. You can see she's got a cap on because they had shaved her head so that she wouldn't have a boy's haircut. So she's got a cap on. And even though after her clothes were taken from her, after she was condemned, she wanted to continue wearing men's clothing, they wouldn't let her. They executed her in simple women's clothing, a simple shift. So that's what we see here. And then inside the church, this is the statue of her inside, which is a little bit more abstract. It ties in the flames. And I love, and also have weird feelings about the candle holders here, because they're clearly meant to be part of the flames too. So when we light a candle here, when we add a candle here to this statue, which, lighting a candle is a way of prayer in Catholic traditions. So when we add our prayers visually, we're adding to the flames. And that's kind of an uncomfortable, it was an uncomfortable thing for me in the moment to be thinking about. And what I decided, I have no idea if this was the intent, but what I decided is that this invites me to think about the ways that I might unknowingly be adding to the flames. Just as there's theological rhetoric about how flippantly, your sins make the baby Jesus cry, or all the suffering that Jesus went through on the cross is was all the suffering for our sins ever, and our sins are part of what contributes to the suffering. And I'm not a big fan of substitutionary atonement theology, but by a similar token, thinking about in what ways might I be contributing to the persecution of someone who doesn't conform? In what ways might I be misusing religion? In what ways might I be overly dogmatic and persecuting? In what ways might I be part of the oppression rather than the resistance? So to me, this statue and this entwined candle holder asks us to consider those things, asks us to think about that as we encounter this here. I also wanted to say there's a really great article on Tiger Beatdown, which is a now defunct blog, but there's a really great article about Joan on Tiger Beatdown about her queerness. And I want to be clear that I think it's important both to respect what Joan says about herself, that, you know, she identified as a woman and identified very strongly as a virgin, and her faith was extremely important to her. I feel like that's important not to elide. But also, she was gender inappropriate for the time, right? She was transgressing gender norms. And that makes her, among other things, a natural patron for queer folk, for folk resisting oppression. We'll get a little bit more into the ways that various groups see and identify with Joan in just a minute, but her place as a patron of the oppressed and of those who are in conflict with prevailing norms is super, super dear to my heart. That said, I also wanted to show you this. So this is a recreation of the banner that Joan had made, or had the Dauphin make for her. It's kind of small, but this is the representation I liked best. So up here on the banner we have Jesus enthroned in glory, sitting on a rainbow. Now I know that in that time, the rainbow was not the queer symbol that it is today. However, today, this is a big queer Jesus banner. And I love it for that. So yes, I wanted to include that. I feel like this should be resurrected among queer Christian groups. I feel like it is time for this to come back. So, yes, Matricula, all praise big queer Jesus. So moving on, that was the modern church of Joan of Arc. This is Notre Dame de Rouen. This is the cathedral. And y'all, externally, this may be my favorite Gothic cathedral that I've ever been to. Replacing Barcelona for me, because it is extremely intricate and it is some fucking lacework in stone. It's amazing. It's so delicate looking, so intricate, just gorgeous. and I love it a lot, and I needed to share it. This is a shot at the inside, just to let you know that it's equally fabulous on the inside. Continuing some of the stone lace work here. But in the cathedral, there's a little side chapel, actually a relatively large side chapel, as these things go, for Joan. And I feel like this is particularly important in the town where she was condemned, in the town where she died, that now she's installed here. Now she's recognized. Now she's rehabilitated. I wish I had a closer picture of this statue. It shows her bound in women's clothes with the fire coming up around her. And I wish I had better pictures of the stained glass. We didn't have a lot of time here. We were still on the organized tour, and Spouse did really well, really well, just to get this one. It was a very quick thing. But this was gorgeous. And I love that she's here. And the fact that she's right arts, it's very dark. The fact that she's officially here, that she's officially recognized, that she's in the cathedral, speaks to the ways that after she was rehabilitated, so after her trial, after her execution, Joan's mom went around talking to everyone she could find, political authorities, church authorities, and begging for a retrial, begging for them to get her daughter's good name back. Stop referring to her as a witch and a heretic, which, no shade on witches, right? But in that time, witch was not a good thing to be. And so after that happened, and especially after the Catholic Church beatified her in the 20th century, she's been used in all kinds of ways. She's really important to French national identity, right? Because for the peasants, that was what was most at stake in the war. They didn't have, they were peasants. They were under the heel of whatever lord was in charge, whether they were French or English, one way or the other. There wasn't a huge amount of difference to their daily life, except their identity as French, not English. Their freedom to keep that identity, to keep that culture, and not be assimilated. It's okay to resist the Borg, right? So she's critical to French national identity, which means that some really nasty people who want to talk about French national identity have also glommed onto Joan. Like the French National Front. The ultra-right-wing folks have adopted her as an emblem of nationalism. And I can only imagine Joan be like, fuck you all. You want to do to other people what the English did to us, and you suck. But they're glomming onto her because she's such a shining, pure figure, right? It is weird and perverse, and so these things go. However, in the US and Canada, I feel like there's much more. She's seen much more in a, she's a woman pushing back against patriarchy. She's a woman pushing back against oppression. So much more what I would think of as positive political agenda. And again, I didn't know this till I was researching the ways that she's showed up as a signifier of identity and shows up in various cultures. Apparently, in some Latin American revolutionary leftist movements, they see and recognize her as an early popular resistance leader. And that seems very right to me. That seems like something that she would appreciate, being back in that. So feel free to drop questions or observations in the chat. We're going to move away from Joan for just a few moments. We've spent a goodly deal of time with her, so we're gonna move away for a bit. Because this isn't the only cool thing in Rouen Cathedral, and I wanted to show you all just a couple of things. So this is a tomb of Richard the Lionhearted, but only his embalmed heart is here in the cathedral. His bowels were buried within the church in the town where he was killed, and his body lies in a totally different place. But the lion heart of Richard the Lionheart is in Rouen Cathedral, and we totally got to, look at the tomb. This was definitely the coolest tomb. And then, so around back of the altar area, in the circle around back, there were a whole bunch of really weathered statues that had once been up on the facade outside the church, and due to weather and wear and tear had been replaced, so the old weathered ones had been brought inside. As an example, this super creepy don't blink, don't even blink, they are incredibly fast, don't blink angel was there among the prophets and the saints and whole conclave of other statues. But I thought this one was particularly creepy and excellent. And then moving outside into the courtyard outside one of the exits. No, we haven't gotten to Mary Magdalene stuff yet, but this is not Mary Magdalene. This is Mary of Egypt, St. Mary of Egypt. If you notice, she's got a lot of hair flowing down over her front, and she gets conflated with St. Mary Magdalene. They get talked about as one person, thought of as their lore gets conflated. With all the Marys running around, it's a thing that happens. And she was a convert, and she went into the desert to become a hermit, live a life of contemplation. And in the desert, there's not a lot for clothing, right? But when you're a hermit, modesty is extremely important, even if there are only the critters of the desert to see you naked. And like the one hermit who comes to see you and bring you basic supplies every 6 months or so. Yes, are too many Marys. Too many. It's very confusing. And so we have to maintain our modesty even in the middle of the desert. So her hagiography talks about her having a miraculous growth of hair. And some portrayals interpret that as like just super hirsute saint, fuzzy all over, has grown a coat of hair. But which I think is the more practical option, right? Other representations, like this one. One of these days I'll get my directions figured out. Other representations portray her as just having a huge amount of hair from her head cloaking her body, which seems woefully impractical to me, and liable to get caught on everything. But it often allows for like tits poking through the hair, so much more satisfying for for the dudes making the drawings, I suppose. And she has a kitty lion, because when she died, as all saints eventually do, the hermit who came to bring her supplies found her dead, and a passing lion helped him bury her. Good kitty. So I was fascinated by this. So that's a lot of hair. I want to go research this. And now, here to close us out, so later in this series, there are going to be streams dedicated to centaur spotting in the wild, spotting mythical creatures in urban environments, because there's a lot of that later in the trip. Like rose quartz. I'm not caught up enough to know how this is like rose quartz, but I will trust you. I will trust you. So this is also in the courtyard area. These little reliefs, little tiny reliefs about this big. And I tried to zoom in as much as possible and still get them. Because we talked last time a little bit about inappropriate things showing up on churches, like bare-breasted mermaids, as you do. But at least that's nautical in theme. Here we have a centaur going into battle. We have a hunched old man satyr type thing. Not really sure. A dude taking a tumble down a hill or something. And what, to me, looks like a fierce ass gorgon. She's got the super snaky hair. And whether she's meant to be or not, I am running with the idea that this is a fucking gorgon on, decorating a church. Also, on the other column of things, the second one from the bottom, I think the one on the bottom is a dragon or a hydra. The second one up is a phoenix, because it looks kind of burny, I think. And then we've got like dwarves and someone riding on a swan, and there's a whole lot of crazy shit here, and there was even more than I showed here, but yeah, crazy mythical shit showing up on churches. I am here for it, even when I don't understand it. And then finally, I had to zoom in on these two because I have no idea what's going on here. This lizard dragon body with like modest woman with scarf veil thing head. I don't know if this is a lady basilisk or just lady dragon, demon. It feels kind of Naga-ish to me, but I'm pretty sure that that's not what they're referencing. But this one in particular, like, Where did that come from? I have no idea. I mean, I know where this one came from. This is a pipe playing satyr, and I am here for that, but I understand it a lot more. And yes, Lady Basilisk would be an amazing stage name. I would go see anything and everything that Lady Basilisk could think to do, even at the risk of being petrified. I would do it. So that is a lot of what my trip to Rouen looked like. There were a lot more church pictures involved, and there was a visit to an ossuary, which is, bone storage for after you've had your time being buried in the dirt, and they dig up your bones and put them somewhere else so they can put other people in the place you were buried. And that was really cool, but I did not want to talk all afternoon about this, and I knew I was going to be going on about Joan for a goodly long while. So, like I said, feel free to drop any questions or comments, but thank you for letting me yell about Joan and how she's queer and amazing, and coming with me to look at cool church art as well. Thank you for being here. And next week, my stream is going to be on Thursday. So I am scheduled to work at a new part-time job on Wednesday. So I've got it scheduled under the events. We will be going to Amsterdam and talking about unexpected sculptures and the red light district, and a little bit about how Amsterdam is way more civilized in some respects. Matricula. I really loved all the different depictions of Joan, and I loved them for their variety and their intensity. It was so good. It was so good. So hopefully I will see you next week. And let's see who is on right now that we can go raid. Is Cacophony on right now? Let's see. Go have a tiny raid. Oh, yep. So we'll go mini raid Cacophony. Yay! We are going over there. Thank you, Matricula and Matricula spouse, and or anyone else all you other folks who tuned in. It was wonderful. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me yell at you. And I will see you next week.